Imagine the sharp sting of salt water against your skin as you re-dragged across a rocky shore toward a massive ship. You're only 17, standing on the jagged coastline, feeling the weight of an uncertain future. Everything you've known, family, friends, safety, has vanished in the blink of an eye. The men pulling you along speak in harsh foreign tongues, their laughter more animalistic than human. The thick ropes biting into your wrists are the last tether to a life that is already slipping away. Behind you, smoke curls up from the remains of your village. It chokes the air, burning your throat as you breathe in the heavy scent of devastation. The world you once knew is gone, and now you are nothing more than a prize, a spoil of war. This is just the beginning of a nightmare that will become your new reality, one that will be darker and more horrific than you can imagine. This is the Viking Age, a period stretching from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century. We often picture this time as a world of daring explorers, fierce warriors, and brilliant shipbuilders. The legendary longships, the raids on the British Isles, and the famous attack on Lindisfarne are the images that come to mind. However, beneath these heroic tales lies a darker, more brutal truth. For centuries, the Vikings built their economy around a horrifying trade, the enslavement of human beings. Slavery wasn't just a byproduct of Viking raids. It was often the primary goal. It was considered the richest reward a raid could bring. From the shores of the British Isles to the dense forests of Eastern Europe, countless women were taken, stripped of their identities, and sold into slavery. This story is not sensationalized for dramatic effect. It's a cold, hard fact reconstructed from Viking law codes, surviving accounts from monks, archaeological evidence, and the records of Arab traders who interacted with the Norse merchants. If you're drawn to the raw truth of history, stay with me, and let's dive deeper into the machinery that made this brutal system function. Raids were not the chaotic, unorganized affairs that popular stories often depict. In reality, these raids were carefully planned operations, almost like business ventures. A local Viking leader or a group of partners would pool resources to fund a raid. This included timber for shipbuilding, iron nails, wool for sails, food for the crew, and much more. The objective? Profit, and the most dependable form of profit came from capturing and selling slaves. Viking ships, known for their remarkable design, were perfectly suited to this grim trade. Long, shallow draft vessels like the Snake AR and the larger Sky could glide over the sea and travel up rivers, bypassing the defenses of unsuspecting lands. Even settlements 100 miles inland could be targeted, their inhabitants waking up to the terrifying sight of Viking ships silently approaching. The goal of these raids was not only to plunder wealth, but to capture women, particularly from what historians call soft monasteries, unprotected religious settlements that were easy targets. These raids were efficient and devastating, with women often carried off in large numbers. In 821, for example, the Irish annals recorded a raid on Wexford in which a great host of women was taken. Once captured, a woman's identity ceased to exist. She was no longer someone's daughter, sister, or wife. In Viking society, she became a te-hr, the Norse word for slave. This dehumanizing term reflected the fact that slaves were treated as property, not people. They were considered part of a farm's stock, like cattle or sheep. They had no legal rights, and a master could abuse or even kill them without facing any consequences. The journey to captivity was brutal. Women were often chained together and forced to march for miles to the nearest port where Viking ships awaited. Once aboard, they were packed like cargo, alongside stolen goods and armed men. The voyage could last for weeks, and many died from exposure, sickness, or the harsh conditions. For those who survived, the nightmare didn't end with the journey. Archaeological evidence supports this thriving trade. In Scandinavia, tens of thousands of Islamic dirham coins have been found, particularly on Gotland, a key trading hub in this network. These coins speak to the extensive economic relationship between the Vikings and the Arab world, where the most valuable commodity traded was not amber or furs, but human lives. At these markets, enslaved women were displayed like livestock. The Arab envoy Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who traveled with Viking traders along the Volga River in the 10th century, recorded chilling details of the process. Captives were arranged in rows, and their worth was often demonstrated through brutal, public acts of domination. A woman's body was treated as a commodity to be evaluated before the sale. For most captives, the future was grim. Women were forced into the hardest labor, from grinding grain to brewing ale to washing wool. Their work sustained entire Viking households, and their strength was the backbone of the Norse economy. They were also tasked with producing textiles like vadmal, a coarse wool fabric essential to Viking society. Each step in the textile process, shearing, washing, carding, spinning, and weaving, required immense strength and time, all of which rested on the backs of enslaved women. This endless toil took a physical toll. Studies of Viking skeletons show that those buried with few possessions, likely slaves, suffered from malnutrition and heavy physical strain, their bones marked by the long hours of backbreaking labor. But for some women, the exploitation went further. Sexual servitude was a common fate for enslaved women in Viking society. The law considered this a right of the master, not a crime. Even in later Icelandic sagas, which were written centuries after the Viking Age, the custom is plainly reflected. Powerful men were known to keep enslaved women as concubines, known as frillaburn, though their status remained that of a slave, no matter their relationship to the man. The fate of these women was often sealed by their rank. A high-status woman, such as a princess, the daughter of a king, or a wealthy church official, might be taken hostage and held for ransom with her family, forced to pay large sums of silver land or other valuables to secure her release. But the most horrific fate of all was ritual sacrifice. Some enslaved women were chosen to die alongside their masters in Viking burial rites. The Arab envoy Ahmad ibn Fadlan witnessed one such death in 922 when an enslaved woman was sacrificed to accompany a Rus chieftain into the afterlife. This was not a voluntary act. She had no choice but to obey, as her life was completely controlled by her master. These ritual sacrifices were not isolated incidents. Archaeological finds from graves throughout the Viking world suggest that some enslaved women were offered up to die in service of their masters, even in death. These women were seen as property, to be used and discarded as their masters saw fit, even in the afterlife. What makes this history even more unsettling is how normalized it was within Viking society. Slavery was an accepted part of the Viking economy and social structure. These women were often invisible, their labor fueling the economy and their bodies sustaining the growth of a brutal empire. Their stories were rarely told, but they are an essential part of understanding the Viking Age in its entirety. The decline of Viking slavery came slowly, with the spread of Christianity throughout Scandinavia in the 10th and 11th centuries. The church discouraged the enslavement of fellow Christians, but the practice continued for many years, shifting toward enslaving Slavs and Baltic peoples. In the end, the Viking Age left behind a legacy that is both grand and tragic. Behind the tales of dragon-proud ships and legendary warriors lies the untold story of countless women who were captured, exploited, and stripped.